Welcome to the Demography Today lecture series, sponsored by the VVVA Foundation and co-organized with the Spanish National Research Council and the LOMPOC project, Horizon 2020 project. We are very lucky today to have Serguei Scherbov here. He's one of the European Research Council advanced grant in Europe. That means one of the highly recognized scholars in Europe on the social science and specifically on demography. He is Deputy Program Director of the World Population Program of the International Institute for Applied System Analysis, Director of Demographic Analysis at the Wittgenstein Center for Demography and Global Human Capital, and leader of the Population Dynamics and Forecasting Research Group at the Vienna Institute of Demography of the Austrian Academy of Science. And he's as well head of the International Laboratory of Demography and Human Capital at the Russian Presidential Academy of National Economy and Public Administration, and affiliated to other institutions as well. And he has been publishing hugely on the field of demography, specifically on projections of population and adult mortality. And we were very interested in having him here in this lecture series because it's one of the topics that we are more interested. So welcome, Serguei, to Madrid. It's a pleasure to have you here. We normally have around 1 hour or so for the talk, and then we open the floor for questions. So feel free, and whenever you want to start.
So that is the title. Remeasuring aging, are the 40s really the new 30s? So I will be talking, whatever I will be talking today is based on the joint work with Warren Sanderson, with whom we collaborate on this issue. And this is funded, as Diego said already, by European Research Council grant on re-aging, which I received several years ago. So that's the outline of my presentation. So first I give some introduction, then we talk about conventional definitions of aging. Then we talk about new measures of aging, and you look at the prospects of aging when we apply new measures of aging. And then some sort of generalization. I talk a little bit about characteristic-based measures of age and aging and have some conclusions. So I will be using World Population Prospects of the United Nations. That's United Nations once in a while. Basically, usually every 2 years, although that was, I think there was a gap of 3 years between 2012 and 2015. They produce projections for every country in the world. So fertility projections, migration projections, mortality projections, and this is sort of state, well, it's a standard, I would say. I would not say maybe it's the state of the art, but it's a standard. Then I would use also human mortality database. I guess many of you know that's one of the nicest, best collections of demographic data on mortality. And I would use something from European demographic data sheet. I have, I think, a couple of copies with me. That's what Vienna Institute of Demography together with IIASA, Wittgenstein Center is producing. Actually, Wittgenstein Center, that it's maybe should be known, it is just a joint collaborative effort between Vienna Institute of Economics and Business, International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, and Vienna Institute of Demography. So it's just like a roof which is based on 3 pillars. Now, headlines. So we all know that aging is considered to be the huge problem. I'm not going to read all that, you can read that, but aging poses a global challenges. These are just headlines from different newspapers, like New York Times, like Economist, some journals. So global aging poses a significant threat to global prosperity. So that's what we hear all the time. Before talking about aging, we have first to define what is aging. So there are several definitions. General definition is that population aging is a process by which older individuals become a proportionally larger share of the total population. That's very general definition. Aging population is a summary term for shifts in the age distribution of a population towards older ages. So this is understandable. Now, these were definitions. Now, how do we measure aging? There are several ways we measure aging. From Encyclopedia of Population, the aging of population is often measured by increases in the percentage of older people of retirement ages. Second, also from Encyclopedia of Population, the median age, the age at which exactly half the population is older and another half is younger, is perhaps the most widely used indicator of aging. So we're saying that aging occurs when median age of population rises. Now, very important measure, old age dependency ratio. So since many studies in population are concerned with burden, which will occur due to aging, due to a bigger share of older people, old age dependency, which is the number of individuals of retirement ages divided compared to the number of those at working ages. So this is also very, very often used measure of aging. And that's just an illustration, headlines. You see, The Economist, the World Bank, all top journals, institutions are talking about aging and referring to old age dependency ratio or dependency ratio. Dependency ratio would also consider not only older people, but also children. So that's one of the probably most used measures. Now, the question is, who is old? So how do we measure the proportion of older people? We need to define who is old. So United Nations defined older persons as those who are age 60 and over. Now, on many occasions that most of European countries, European statistical offices, they would define older people as 65 plus, so 65 and older. But the boundary is always kept fixed. Now, some illustration. This is the record of oldest male summit of Everest. Let's look. 39-year-old was in 1953 the record. 39-year-old. Now, then we can just follow, and what we see that then in 1985 it was already 50 years, in 2000 it was already 63 years. Now, the most recently, the oldest person was 80 years old. Now, what do all these people above age 60, considered by UN to be old people, are doing? Probably they retire, and half of them should climb Everest, because they're considered to be old. They have to retire. Okay, that's a good thing to do. Now let's look what UN tells us about future of aging. I don't want to quote all that, just the last one, you can read it. The last one is the number of older persons in the world, and by older they consider 60 plus. The number of older persons in the world is projected to be 1.4 billion by 2030, 2.1 billion by 2050, and could rise to 3.2 billion to 2100. So if they're old, they should retire. So if they retire, they have nothing to do except climbing Everest. So say 1.5 billion have to climb Everest. Now, how aging looks according to UN projections. That's how it looks. This is median age. So, of course, it's rising everywhere. It's rising everywhere. Of course, Europe here, you see my mouse? Yes. Europe is, of course, on the top, and Africa is, of course, not really aging much, even by the end of the century. Now, that's European countries, also UN projections. So we see Spain. I put Spain especially here at the top, very thick red line. So you see it's basically almost at the top in 2040. According to projections, it's really becoming top. And then somewhere in the first few countries of Europe. And Europe is the most aging, except Japan and a few more countries. Korea, South Korea. Now, proportion of 65, another measure of aging. It's also, again, we have here Europe, of course, the oldest one. We have a proportion of age 65 reaching almost 30% of population by the middle of this century. And of course, Africa is only very, very slowly aging. And this is by countries. Again, Spain, we see here, is one of the top, according to conventional measures, 65, proportion of those who are 65. Old age dependency. Again, Europe is the first, so again, Africa is the last. And you see in Europe, it's almost 55 old age dependency. So which means it is, as it is defined, that on 55 working people in retirement, there are 100 people working. Now, if you look for the countries, then we have Spain almost per 80 people in retirement, 100 workers. So you see it, because it's almost reaching 0.8. So that's traditional old age dependency ratio. So of course, in this way, it's hard to sustain the system when half population work and half population sustain them. It's all the old age dependency. Children are not taken into account here. So if you take children, it will be above 1 considerably. So these systems are not sustainable. Now let's talk about some new measures. So I was showing conventional measures. Now let's look at some new measures. So the basic idea is that literature on aging is exploding, but the whole concept of how we analyze aging is completely static. So we consider people old at some fixed age. Now, to illustrate the concept, let's look at this example. Suppose a man living in Western Europe, I don't know, in Sweden or Norway or Italy, is going to celebrate his 60th birthday. Is he old? I guess in this room he is old. Yes, but in general, probably not today. Why? Because this person would not be considered, be probably considered middle-aged, because today almost 90%, more than 90% of men would celebrate their 60th birthday in Western Europe. However, if you take, say, 150 years ago or 200 years ago, only about 25% of people, of men, would survive until this age. So, which means these people were very old at age 60. Almost no one was reaching this number. So why the person of the same age is considered middle-aged today, and 200 years ago he was considered very old? Oops. Because the traditional measure of age is a backward-looking measure. It only looks at how many years the person lived already. But it's an incomplete measure because it completely ignores the future. It ignores changes in life expectancy. And young and old are measures, are notions which are relative to life expectancy. So in 2 papers with my colleague Warren Sanderson, in Nature in 2005, that was the first paper, and then there were several papers afterwards, but these are major papers. And in Science, we introduced the new notion. We called it the new definition of age. We called it prospective age. So what is it and why do we need it? We saw that it is really important that not only to look at how old people are, how many years they spend on the earth, but to know what's expected to live. Because many decisions people make, they are dependent not only upon how many years they lived, but how many years they may still go ahead. Because if you look, for example, 100 years ago, it was almost unlikely that someone at age 50, 55 would go to the university. People, life expectancy was already, they were already on the limit, so no one would go to the university at that age. Today, it happens all the time. People at age 50 decide to change their life, go take different education, different paths, and get some degree and continue working in different sphere. The same with houses. People are buying houses at age 65, at age 70. They're buying houses because they know the prospects are pretty high. They may still be around, say, 20, 15 years, and that's okay, and they may be in a relatively good health. So many behaviors are dependent upon how many years, in general, we may still expect to live. That's why we have really to take into account not only chronological age, but also what's going to happen, how long we still may live. So prospective age measures how old people are not only from the date of their birth, but also in relation to their lengthening life expectancy. So in certain sense, this prospective age, we standardize age taking into account life expectancy. In a few minutes, it will be crystal clear, I hope. Now, returning back to the example, so using the concept of prospective age, we may state that someone who is 60-year-old today is compared to someone who was 43, say 150, 200 years ago. And in a minute it will be clear how we do this comparison. In terms of the prospects. And on the other hand, someone who was 60-year-old in 200 years or 150 years ago, it didn't change much in that 50-year period, Someone at age 60 was resembling someone of 74 today. So essentially what we do, we recognize people of having two different ages. One is chronological age. So everyone who has the same chronological age lived the same time. So everyone with the same age lived the same number of years. And then we have a prospective age. Prospective age is concerned about the future. So everyone with the same prospective age may expect to live the same number of years, the same remaining life expectancy. So prospective age requires the year of reference, which we call standard year. For example, all people who have prospective age 40 would have the same remaining life expectancy as 40-year-old person had in standard year. I will show some nice table. This is very close to what we know about constant dollars. That's how we measure prices, in constant dollars. We fixed, like constant dollar is used to compare values from one period to another by taking inflation into account. The same, actually, prospective age. So that's why when we introduced this notional prospective age, there was immediately a notion of age inflation. So it was sort of generated by this notion of prospective age. But in financial data, we use price indexes to convert dollars into constant dollars. In demography, we use life tables. So those of you who know life tables, we use life tables. Here is an illustration. I hope it will become much clearer from this table. So what is here? Here we have England and Wales, remaining life expectancy is written here. So for women in 1900, at age 40, that was their remaining life expectancy. So someone who survived until age 40 was expecting on average to live 27.4 years. For men, at age 40, it was 25 in 1900. Now, in 1920, in 1940, at those ages, 1990, at this age, women were expected to live exactly the same remaining number of years. And men also. So someone, on average, at age 51, in 1990, was expecting to live 25 years, the same number of years as a 40-year-old person in 1900. So what we are saying, that all these people have exactly the same prospective age. If the standard, that's like with constant dollar, it shifts depending upon which year we select. If we select in constant dollars 1950, prices will be on one level. If we select 1980, on the other level. The same here. If we select 1900 as a standard year, then all those people have prospective age 40 if the standard is 1900. Or they would all women would have age 55.3 if the standard is selected 2001, 2003. Is this clear? Because this is the crucial part. The rest is built upon that. So that's how we define, how we standardize, how we define this prospective age. Now, and that's some nice illustration for Spain. Actually, this illustrates the whole title of this presentation. 40s, new 30s. Now, what do we see here? Here, in 2010, 40-year-old person has certain remaining life expectancy. So he is 40-year-old. So this 40 corresponds to this 40. Now, people at different years, at these ages, had exactly the same remaining life expectancy. So what do we have here? That 40-year-old person, woman, in 2010, had exactly the same remaining life expectancy as 30-year-old woman at age 60 in Spain. So that's illustration. So here it just exactly this title. Are 40s really the new 30s? Yes, they are. You have the same for 50-year-old woman at age 50 would have the same remaining life expectancy as 40-year-old woman at age 40 in 1960, which means 50s and new 40s. It's not exactly for 80s, but maybe soon it will come, because we know that today most of the life expectancy grows in countries with high life expectancy goes because of decrease in mortality in high ages. That's what you observe now these days. Now, this Spanish males, okay, situation is similar, a little bit different. So maybe in 2013, the remaining life expectancy is the same in 1960, but the basics is the same. So everywhere it happens. In all, at least countries with high life expectancy, Western European countries, OECD countries, the picture is very, very similar. That's United Kingdom. Also, you see, that's 2000, that's, what is it? Oh, that's correct. That's Japan, for example, in 2000. Here is the baseline is different, it's 2040. In 2000, 40-year-old person would have the same remaining life expectancy as in 1960, even 25-year-old person. So really, really big changes in perception of age, because that's how far we go, how many years are ahead. So our decisions depend upon how long we live. Not all countries do like that. Like this is the case of Russia. In Russia, it was opposite. So someone in 2000, say, let's see, 2000, at age 40, because this is a line for those, had the same remaining life expectancy. Yes, at age 40, had the same remaining life expectancy in 2000, age 40, as 48-year-old in 1960. So it's a double aging happening here. If in other countries people are becoming a bit younger, so here it's double speed of aging. And in a few minutes I will illustrate this with prospective median age. Now let's look, taking this into account, let's look how the aging occurs if we apply new measures. So here I would apply simply median age. I would calculate prospective median age. So exactly the same way. Median age is age. I plug it into standard and see how things are changing. So this is Switzerland. This is traditional median age. We see that it is growing, 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 and growing. This is prospective median age. So it's basically standardized the way I showed with increase in life expectancy. What do we see? No aging. Rejuvenation. Population becomes younger. Now, this place where it crosses, so what is important here? The dynamics, not particularly the level, because the level will depend upon the selection of standard. Here, I selected the standard 1980. So that's why the overcross here. The standard, at the standard, your prospective measures overcross traditional measures. If it would be this here, then the whole curve would come down. If it would be high, it will come up. Important is the dynamics. In dynamics, population is becoming younger. That's England and Wales. That's traditional median age. This is prospective median age. Population is becoming younger. No aging. The moment we take into account the lengthening of life, the increase in life expectancy, no aging happening. This is Japan. Well, it comes up a bit by 2002, but it's basically the same as it was 2047. So it first came down and then came up. So basically, during this period, not much aging occurred. Oops. And that's Spain. So this is prospective median age. That's civil war. There was a jump, of course, in mortality. And mortality, since it is related to calculation of prospective measures, life expectancy was lower. So then, of course, the prospective measure is higher. But in general, we see that it was basically coming down. Slightly increases today. So today is basically like it was in the 60s. So not really much aging occurred. While if you take traditional measure, it comes up. So on this picture, I have for most of the European countries which have data in human mortality database, I did this type of calculations. So red always shows prospective measure, and blue always shows traditional measure. So except Eastern European countries like Bulgaria, Belarus, what else? Where is Russia? Ukraine. Somewhere is Russia is here. Anyway, so for those countries, we see that these two lines basically go together. So there was no really increase in life expectancy. So whether you standardize it or not, it's the same behavior. Is this clear? But in most of the Western European countries, Great Britain, Luxembourg, we see completely different pictures. Spain, you see, this is what I have shown. Belgium, you see, it coming down while traditional measure comes up. Switzerland. In Canada, it stays somehow almost constant, while traditional measure comes up. Now, let's look at the projections, UN projections, the one that I started at the beginning. So this is what I have shown. That's the forecast of median age until 2100. That's the prospective median age. It goes after a certain time in the opposite direction, you see? And this is a big difference because some countries here, like Spain, is something like in 2040 is something like 53. Here it's something like 48. It's 5 years difference in the next 13, 15 years. It's huge. But the most important is the dynamics. The population are becoming younger after certain period. Many countries immediately go down. But some countries which have very difficult structure, and Spain is among those countries because they have very low fertility for quite some time, then that's sort of the pay. At some point, there will be even prospective measures that will show still increase in median age. Now, we were discussing one of the measures of aging. At the beginning, I mentioned there are several measures. We were discussing median age. So we showed that if we take into account increases in life expectancy, this measure shows us that actually, historically, population was becoming younger. Now let's look at the proportion of older people. Now, first illustration. What is we have here? Low mortality OECD countries, proportion of population at age 65. It's increasing. Yes, I have here data, 2010. Now, that's just average. So definitely there is increase in proportion of those 65 plus. Now, let's see how life expectancy was increasing at age 65 plus. That's how it was increasing. It was increasing. And that's an average. It's even sort of an accelerated increase. Now, what do we see here? We see here that somewhere in the 70s, life expectancy at age 65, remaining life expectancy, was somewhere around 15 years on average. And we already considered people in the beginning of 70s old at this age because they are supposed to retire in some countries even earlier. But 65, we really considered people old. Now, let's do the following. Let's, like in the 70s, consider people old when their remaining life expectancy is 15 years or less. Now, let's see what was the age when remaining life expectancy was 15 years or less in low mortality OECD countries. That's how it grows. So it comes now, it's even somewhere here. For some countries, it's 75 years. That's on average. So we see that basically the person who was considered old in the 70s with his remaining life expectancy, 15 years of age, today this person with the same characteristic, 15 years remaining life expectancy, would be 72, 73, in some cases 75. So those people are equivalent in terms of their future. Now, so let's assume that someone with remaining life expectancy is old when he has 15 years. Sorry, someone with remaining life expectancy 15 years or less is considered to be old. That's a threshold of being old. Now let's look how the proportion of these old people changes. So we change the definition. Who is old? It's not someone at age 65, but it's someone with remaining life expectancy 15 years and less. Like in 1970, we considered people with remaining life expectancy 15 years and less as old people. Let's just fix it. 15 years and less. Now, that's what happens for OECD countries. No aging at all. And that's combined, averaged. No aging. So once we allow this threshold to move of who is old, then the picture is completely different. And what we think that it is extremely strange to assume that the person is old at age 65 everywhere and forever, or at age 60. As I showed at the beginning, UN considered someone else old at age 60. Why? Because if we compare women at age 60, say in Spain, and in Burkina Faso at age 60, these are two different worlds. Or in Japan and Burkina Faso. Or if we compare a man at age 65 living in Spain today and living 150 years ago. Completely different people, different characteristics, different mental characteristics, different physical characteristics. But we are still in all the calculations, World Bank, UN, as I showed, economists, always consider them to be the same. So always this threshold of who is old is fixed, 65 or 60 even, and with all the calculations like fixing this age, which makes no sense. People are very different. Characteristics of people change. We cannot compare people in space and in time having the same characteristics at age 60 or 65 or 70. It doesn't matter whether we fix any sort of threshold of who is old. It's important that this threshold is moving because people live longer, people perform better, people cognitive characteristics are better, and that's most of the tests show. For example, a lot of cognitive tests show that people 10 years ago made at age, say, 65, 70, completed cognitive tests worse than they are doing now. Physically, people are stronger. So that's why we should not even, and this is only 10 years period, so that's why we should not fix the threshold of who is old. That's a major idea. We should use characteristics of people. And remaining life expectancy is one of the characteristics. In a few minutes, I'll talk about other characteristics. But so far, I'm just trying to say that the threshold of whom we consider old should be changing. So with this changing threshold, like I showed now, there is no aging. Now, that's basically how this threshold was changing between 2000 and 2013 in some European countries. So this threshold of who is old. Like in Spain, it changed during 10 years. I mean, it's recalculated per 10 years. So people were considered 1.7 years older as being old compared to 2000 and, say, 2010. But in some countries, it's even higher, like Finland. But in some countries like Moldova, it's very low. Slovenia is very high. So Netherlands is about the same. So that's basically the speed of changing who is old. So it should be moving. Now, let's look at the projections. So this is projections by UN. Proportion, so as I said, we are now discussing second measure. So this proportion of age 65. So that's the projection of those who are age 65. So again, Spain here is one of the champions. And is about 35% of people above age 65 are considered to be in 2050. A lot. Now let's consider that 65 is not the old age threshold. It's moving. It's a very different picture. Basically, no aging even in the future. Now, this is old age dependency ratio. Again, Spain is among champions and almost, as I already showed this picture, reaching almost 80.8. So per traditional per 100 workers, 80 people non-dependent, okay? Because it's old age dependency. Now, that's if you take into account that people are different. The threshold should be moved. It's a completely different picture. Basically, almost no aging. Well, that's just a picture from our previous data sheet, which we make in this Wittgenstein Center. Just shows that this is conventional. It's even the previous one. It's not the most recent one, but it doesn't matter. Because what it shows that we made at that time projection until 2030. So blue area is where conventional old age dependency ratio is low. These colors correspond to higher old age dependency, traditional old age dependency. So of course, if you have higher life expectancy, you have more people on older ages, and traditional measures show it's higher. Now, this is prospective measure, which takes into account that people live different number of years, and they are healthier longer if they live longer. The picture is completely opposite. So now this is much lower, and all Eastern Europe have very high level of dependency. And that's just an illustration from the most recent European data sheet that we produce. So we see these are traditional measures. Who are the champions in 2015? Old age dependency ratio. Italy, Greece, Germany, Sweden projected 2050. Portugal, Greece, Spain, Slovenia, Italy, highest. Now, once we look into prospective old age dependency ratio, where we take into account increases in life expectancy and the threshold of who is old is moving, completely different picture, not of a single Western European countries is here. It's Bulgaria, Serbia, Latvia, Ukraine, Lithuania today, and basically same countries in 2050. Because here we have projections 2050. Questions on that? Okay. Now, there is a very interesting thing happening if we take into account these new measures. Traditionally, if we take traditional measures, then we all know that that's why we are always warned that life expectancy is increasing and aging occurs. The stronger increases in life expectancy, the stronger aging. Of course, if we're not talking about fertility, if fertility is a constant. This is true for traditional measures. But what is interesting about these new measures, that the higher life expectancy grows, the more grows, the longer population lives, the younger population becomes, using these new measures that take into account the standardized these measures of aging with increases with life expectancy. And here's an example of the paper we recently published. That was example for Germany. We made projections for using this European data sheet data from 2013 to 2050. So there are three scenarios here. One scenario was constant life expectancy, no growth in life expectancy. Then was growth of life expectancy in 1 year per decade, that's scenario 2, and growth of life expectancy 2 years per decade. That is what is basically observed today, well, for the last 50, 60 years in Western European countries. Life expectancy grows about 2.1 years per decade on average. That's what happens. Now, what do we calculate here? Median age. So these are traditional median age measures. So if life expectancy doesn't grow, then median age calculated traditional way and prospective median age that takes into account growth in life expectancy show exactly the same. Yeah, because there is no growth in life expectancy, so there is no, there is nothing to standardize with because it's fixed. Now, here we have 1 year difference in life expectancy. So traditional measures, so 1 year per decade growth in life expectancy. Traditional measures, median age increases from a little below 3 to almost to 4.5. While prospective measure, it decreases. And if you have what was observed, traditional increase in life expectancy, which was observed for the last 50 years or 60 years, 2 years per decade, we have median age increases by 6 years. That's increase between 2013 and 2050. By 6 years, while if we apply measure which standardizes median age with changes in life expectancy, it's decreased. Population becomes younger. So I was talking now about only one measure, and this measure is remaining life expectancy. It's only one characteristic of population. So in 2013, we published an article in Population Development Review where we generalize this whole notion of remeasuring aging, and we introduced the characteristic-based measure of age and aging. So remaining life expectancy is one of the characteristics, but there could be plenty of other characteristics. Any characteristic, like mortality rate, like survivorship, like, I would show later a few examples, hand grip strength. These are all characteristics. There are plenty of tests in many of surveys, like chair rise speed, like walking speed. These are all characteristics of population. There are plenty of characteristics on cognitive abilities. So these are all characteristics, and we have to take them into account, because aging is not what is being done now is considering aging is being measured by only one measure, retrospective age or calendar age, and that's it. But aging is a multidimensional process. We cannot just use only one chronological age. Aging is a very complicated process, and we have to take many dimensions into account, not only chronological age, but physical conditions, mental conditions, many different characteristics of people. So that's what we basically did. We introduced a new approach to measure population aging. Here are some definitions, but later, if something is not clear, later from the pictures it will become clear. So basically, we say that there are certain characteristics which are associated with every age. Let's say certain population in certain country at certain time. With age, at this time, which we have here T, and A is age, certain characteristics are associated, like hand grip, or mortality rate, or remaining life expectancy. At every age, it's different. The important thing that this characteristic has to be monotonic, but in older ages, most characteristics are becoming monotonic. Either they come down or they come up. So if it is monotonic, then we can calculate so-called alpha age in this way. We assign characteristic, and we look at what age this characteristic is reached. Is this clear? If we have some dynamics, characteristic changes with age, then for each age we have particular characteristics, right? Particular characteristic. So, which means for each characteristic, if the function is monotonic, we have particular age, right? So it's inverse problem. We have characteristic. Here on X we have age. So, but for each characteristic we have also age. So that's how we calculate age. So that's the way how we define this characteristic approach. We fix certain characteristic of population, and then we see at what age this characteristic is reached in different time points or in space. I will demonstrate it in a few minutes with the charts where it will become crystal clear. Like one of the characteristics, which we used already with you, that was remaining life expectancy at 15 years or less. That's fixed characteristic. Remaining life expectancy 15 years or less. And those fixed characteristics we call alpha ages, which are based on fixed characteristics, constant characteristic ages. And here it will become more clear how all this is calculated. So basically, this characteristic approach to the measurement of aging includes conventional measures of chronological age, but it also includes different characteristics. Like chronological age is also characteristic of the person, characteristics of people, chronological age. Now, remaining life expectancy, what we just discussed with you in another 20, 25 minutes, is characteristic. Now, mortality rate, it's also characteristic. At each particular age, mortality rate is different. And it's monotonically increasing after a certain age. And in high ages, it's increasing. Now, very interesting characteristics, proportion of adult person years lived after a particular age. I will explain in a few minutes what it is. Very interesting characteristic, because this characteristic can be used to define pension age. We had a paper on that where we show that using this characteristic, we can define intergenerationally equitable pension age. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's look at this picture. These are alpha ages associated with 3 population aging characteristics. So how this all is calculated? Now, 2010. I look at the person at age 65, chronological age. This chronological age is the same in 1980. It's always chronological age 65 is chronological age. So if we use traditional age as characteristic, it doesn't change. Now, alpha age based on remaining life expectancy. This is green. What is it? In 2010, for Germany, I think these are male, doesn't matter, just the concept. In Germany, I think for males, I check what is the remaining life expectancy in 2010 for 65-year-old German men. I fix it. Now this is my fixed characteristic. And then I see, and this is green, what is the age in different years when exactly this characteristic is reached. What does it mean? It means that in Germany in 2070, in 2040, 70-year-old person would have exactly the same mortality rate as 60-year-old person had in 2010. Is it clear? Because this is very similar to what we were discussing before. It's the same. I was talking about remaining life expectancy. So we fixed here in 2010 remaining life expectancy of German men at age 65, and green is that the same remaining life expectancy would be at age 70 in 2040. This one is the fixed mortality rate, age-specific mortality rate. So in 2010, we fixed age-specific mortality rate of 65-year-old men in Germany. Now we see this chart, this line shows us what is the age in different time points where exactly this characteristic is reached. So which means that 70-year-old German, say in 2050, would have the same mortality rate as 65-year-old German in 2010. So in terms of this characteristic, these people are equivalent. And we know that, there was some demographers argued that mortality rate is a good proxy for health, for morbidity. And it is probably true. At least there was some article by Jim Vappel in Science or in Nature, some sort of survey article where he argued that this is true, and this is probably true. The higher mortality, the higher morbidity. The higher morbidity, the higher mortality. So, which means we can use it if we use it as a proxy for morbidity, for health, then people are becoming healthier. So the person in 1950, at age 73, is the same healthy as the person in 2010 at age 65. Now, the last one is this one. It's this ratio. So this is what we call life course ratio, which we think is the best to use to define pension age. So what do we fix here? We fix here the ratio. Those of you who know TX, life table, it's TX from life table. Number of person years in life table that are lived above age X. Now, in 2010, this X is 65. So what we basically fix here? We fix person years lived above age 65 divided by person years, in life table person years, lived above age 20. So the proportion lived above age 65 divided years lived above age 65 divided by years lived above age 20. Is this clear? So that's life table. That's a life table concept. So in life table, those of you who don't know what is life table, how can I easily try to explain it? It's like stationary population. Population which doesn't change. Its structure is always the same. So the number of births is the same, mortality doesn't change. So we calculate what is the number, what is the population above age 65 divided by population above age 20. What is the proportion of those 65-year-old in the population above age 20? That's if we sort of think in terms of life table. Now let's, what this dotted line shows us. This dotted line shows us, so if we fix this characteristic, 65 plus T, person years live about 65, divided by person years live above age 20, we fix this, then this is the age in different years when the same ratio is reached. Which means that in 2050, somewhere 68-year-old men, so if we fixed 68, then the proportion of those 68 and above divided by person years live 68 and above divided by person years live 20 and above would be the same as in 2010 was 65 and above divided by 20 and above. So this is the most conservative rise in threshold of being old, if we define threshold of being old according to this characteristic. But what is very interesting here, so if we define pension age, and actually, many countries do define, like UK, Germany, that very much follows this curve, this last. But what is very interesting here, so if we define this as an age at retirement, then we see that people are retiring at better and better health, because this age demonstrates health and this age shows retirement. So if they retire, according to this algorithm, they're retiring healthier and healthier. Okay, so that was Germany, that's Spain. Basically, this picture is very similar if you look into the future. So the same. So that would be our conventional, which we already discussed, prospective measure, which is alpha age measured with remaining life expectancy. This is if we consider mortality rates or in general health or morbidity. And the most conservative is also here life course ratio, as we call it. The United States, yes, also more or less similar picture. Russia is always different. Yes, in the future, for the future, okay, there is still, because that's United Nations assumption, they still assume that life expectancy will be increasing, but it's only a country, well, I think Ukraine, Belarus will be similar, where remaining life expectancy and this life course ratio give us very similar results. And of course here it's, you see what's basically here, that situation in the 60s, but we all know that is the same in terms of life expectancy and all these characteristics as it is now. So there was no change. It was only becoming worse, and now it's slightly better. Now, we defined here alpha ages. But with each alpha age, so basically what is alpha age? It's, according to different characteristics, the threshold of who is old, right? Now, we can look now at the traditional proportions. Now we can look at older proportions, which is traditional 65 plus, proportion of those 65 plus, or older ratios, as we call them, older ratios. Traditional would be 65 plus divided by working population. Now we have this changing threshold of who is old. Now, this is Germany, proportion old. This is traditional one, if we just 65 plus. If we define 65 plus, what would be the proportion of old population? Now, again, they cross over here. It's important not to look in those measures at the level. It's important to look at the dynamics. Because if we select this starting point, not in 2010, but we select it in 1960, then everything, this point, would shift here. And that's the demonstration. I just especially used one example for Germany. I won't use other examples. Here, we start with 1965. And look at how this alpha age changes when we fix it at all the characteristics 1965. You see, they just go tremendously different. So this grows, and traditional proportion old 65 plus, grows up to 20%, and those go much less steep. Grows a little bit here at the end, but basically no aging. So that's why we should not look basically at the level, we should look at the dynamics. And dynamics, here we have huge increase from 60 to 2050. Here we have very, very moderate increase. Here is Spain. Well, for future we still have pretty high increase, even with these alternative measures of aging. But it's not that big if we take it in the whole span. And as I said, important is to look at the whole dynamics, because if we, again, select it, starting from here, then all those three curves will come down considerably. So it's important to see the difference between this point and this point. And this is many, many times smaller than between this point and this point. So aging is happening in the next 50 years, but not exactly terribly bad. That's the United States, where almost no aging, even in the future, is happening, because its age composition is very different from age composition in Spain or Italy. And that's Russian case. Now, these are ratios. So this would be traditional old age dependency ratio, that's Germany, traditional one. From 1960, it was 0.2. It's now, by 2050, it's expected 0.7 almost. But again, those are ratios based on characteristics of people and not just on the fixed age, and they're very different. Like, they are now lower than they were in the middle of 60s. Sorry, projected. Projected in 2050, they would be lower than they were in the middle of 60s, and now they're considerably lower. That's the case of Germany. That's Spain. So today, they are lower than they used to be for the last 40, 50 years. They are still growing, yes, because really very, very strongly aged age composition, so very strong shift because of long fertility, very low fertility for a long time. But again, the change is very different. You see, you compare this point and this point, well, it's, what is it? It's here 0.5 and it's here 0.3, so 0.2. And here we have from almost 0.1 to 0.8. So it's 0.7 difference, 0.2 and 0.7, very big difference. Oops, sorry. No, I pressed somewhere. Okay, now, another application, another characteristic, similar to what I was already discussing. Basically, this is this life course ratio, how we can use it. What I have here, I select the characteristic of Germany. So it's not necessarily we have to select characteristic for one country and use it only for one country. Here, I selected this life course ratio, 65 plus to 20, to person years 2065, as it is in Germany, in 1913. And I'm checking what should be the age when this ratio is the same for other countries. Now, in Germany, it's 65. That's what we fixed. That's why we have this characteristic. Now, we have in Spain, people should go retire older at 66.29 to have the same ratio as it is in Germany. In some countries, that would be at this age, like in Georgia or in Serbia, they can retire at 61. Then they would have the same ratio as Germans would have. Is this clear? Now, in 2030, if we want to have this ratio fixed as it was in 2013, then Germans have to retire, women have to retire at age 67. In Spain, also almost 68. That is if we use characteristic of Germany. So we can be very flexible. We can use this fixed characteristic from different country and compare countries aging, or we can use it for the same country and look how things are changing in time. For example, here here we use real population age composition, because in the previous case we use life table. These are life table measures. So person years lived above age 65 divided by person years 20 to 65. Here we use real populations. So for real population, today the situation, this is the ratio in Germany. So if people retire at age 65, then this ratio, 65 plus by population, this is now real population, 2065, that's if Germans retire at age 65. Now, the same ratio for Spain would be if people retire at age 62.4, women, and men at 62.7. And for all countries you have, for Georgia, it's less than 60. Because in Germany they have very high ratio. Now, if we use country-specific, because now you can use it for country-specific data. Now, we can assume that for every country, we just take this ratio, and we see that, for example, in Spain it's 0.33, for Germany it's 0.39. But let's fix this ratio, and let's see what should be the age at retirement when this characteristic is fixed. So it's fixed at age 65, 2013. What age should deliver the same ratio, 0.33, in Spain in 2030? 69. Is it clear? So if we want to have the same ratio as it was for age 65 in 2013, then at age 30, it should go to 69. But of course, what is not taken into account here is labor force participation. And labor force participation, increasing labor force participation rate can tremendously decrease this economic dependency. In a few minutes, I'll go to economic dependency. Now, another characteristic. This is hand grip. I was just a few minutes ago saying about this characteristic. That's a very nice, very interesting characteristic, because increasingly more and more papers show that the loss of hand grip is very much related to mortality. If the hand grip is much below the average for a particular age, it means something wrong with heart, some pulmonary problems, even Alzheimer. There was a paper in Lancet, and it's just booming area. So what we did here, a few years ago, we had a paper in PLOS ONE with Warren Sanderson, where we looked at education and people divided by different educational age groups, by different educational groups. And as a characteristic, we selected hand grip strengths. We know from the data that hand grip linearly goes down, say, from age 50, because it reaches peak somewhere at age 35, then it's still slowing down, and then almost linearly goes from age 50, 55, goes down. Now, we wanted to see, we selected this as a characteristic of the population. And we wanted to see, does it differ between educational groups? And initially, we thought that probably people with low education will do better with hand grip strengths, not handshake, hand grip strengths. Because there was a lot of literature, a lot of publication in newspapers that scientists now can define what is your age from handshake. Okay, hand grip strengths. So we thought that people who are working in in the constructions, usually with low education, do some physical work, their hand grip should be much stronger. And we were pretty amazed to see that at age 60, it's very different. People with higher education have much stronger hand grip, and that is what is here. So which means, since hand grip is a very good proxy also for aging, people are aging slower, much slower with higher education. So what do we have in this picture? We have here, it's for whites, referenced age of less educated people, age 60. So, with fixed characteristic, with fixed hand grip of white male at age 60. And we look, what is the age of white educated men that gives the same strength of hand grip? And it happened to be 65.8. So they are at age 65.8, the hand grip is the same as for low educate at age 60. So they are aging much slower. And these are prediction intervals. So it's really significant. The same for women. So then we thought, why is it? And then it becomes clear, because people with higher education, they have very different lifestyle. They have different diet, they don't smoke probably, they do care about their health. So probably people with low education, even though they have probably high hand grip, and yeah, if you have all the time in construction, probably you have high hand grip at age 40, 35, they're burnt out by age 60. And that's observed also on shared data. This is based on HRS, Health and Retirement Survey data. So it's really all significant, and that's very interesting results. By age 80, there is almost no difference. Almost no. There is minor difference, but that could be already due to selection. Because, of course, people with low education, we know that mortality is much higher. How much I have with time? Okay. Now, probably that would be sort of my last slide. That's talking about dependency ratios. As I showed at the very beginning, some quotes from World Bank, economists, from wherever. Everywhere, old age dependency ratios, old age dependency ratios. So they are used today for all type of purposes, as proxies for everything. But Bellot, in 1913, first introduced support ratio. There was the first person. And actually in this paper, which we published last year with Warren, almost last year, with Warren Sanderson, are we overly dependent on conventional dependency ratios? We give the whole history of how it was introduced, this old age dependency ratio. So it was first as support ratio. Now, it's more than 100 years, and actually we had first running title, it's time to retire old age dependency ratio. Because it's just completely misleading. Although all politicians, all economic institutions, everyone is using it. Now, but we have it uses for economic dependency, old age dependency are used, for financial dependency, for old age dependency, for medical costs, for pension costs, for everything we use old age dependency as a proxy. And today we have much better measures. They are available. They are on hundreds of websites. For economic dependency, we have economic dependency ratio. For financial dependency, we have NTA, economic support ratios. For old age dependency, we have prospective old age dependency. For medical costs, we have health score costs at old age dependency ratios. For pension costs, we have pension cost dependency ratios. So we have measures which focus on a particular item, and we do not need to use something which was constructed 100 years ago simply because other data did not exist. And that's just example here, economic dependency, this is red, and total dependency ratio. Sometimes total dependency ratio is used as a proxy for economic dependency. Economic dependency takes into account labor force participation rates and real support of those who are not working. So sometimes they do go into different direction, they're different in level. So we are misleading public, we are misleading ourselves if we use incorrect indicators. So that's the conclusion. So aging is probably happening, but we should not exaggerate aging. We should not exaggerate aging simply using wrong measures. So we will be much better off if we use the correct set of measures to measure population aging. This is a very multidimensional process, and we should use different characteristics to measure aging. And here are some materials. I actually have policy brief with me. This is something that we created at IIASA, like not for politicians, but for people who are interested in the subject, where we put most of the literature that we did on this subject and with some ideas on that. So if you are interested, I have maybe 20 copies, 15 copies. So this is also, this literature will be also mentioned there. So that's basically it. Thank you.